Hey Pottery Pals, I've got a little treat for you. It's an old video that I've never really finished putting together. It's on how to build the trash can raku kiln. I finally got it put back together and reprocessed so that it's actually in high def. And I hope you enjoy it. It's a little long. It's like over 30 minutes long with the introduction. So here it is. Disclaimer first, very important. This is a standard 30-gallon trash can, and we're going to be lifting it off the pieces like this. First thing we're going to do is cut a round circle area out of the bottom, this is actually going to be the top of our kiln. It's going to be our exit flue. I'm going to mark the second ring with a Sharpie pen, and that should be about 6 inches or 6.5 inches. We might cut it a little bit smaller on the fiber blanket side. We're going to use a drill and punch a lot of holes where I've marked, and then we're going to take a pair of tin snips and cut through the holes to give it a nice round appearance. And so this is going to be where the gas and the exhaust come out. We're actually going to be using the top of this trash can for the bottom of our kiln in the top hat kiln design. It took a while, but now we've got our circle of holes, and now we're going to snap them out with a pair of tin snips. After you have the top opened up, take a pair of pliers and just bend these little points down. This will protect your hands, and it'll also help hold the fiber blanket in place later. Now we're going to do the same thing, but near the bottom lip of the trash can. About 3 inches or so from the actual lip. Draw this hole a little bit smaller than you did the one on the top, maybe about 4.5 or 5 inches. If you work around electric kilns, you might actually have some element wire lying around, but you'll probably have to end up purchasing high temperature wire for this purpose at your ceramic store. We're going to be making these little flat biscuits with a tab in the back to hold our fiber blanket onto the walls of the kiln. You have to bisque fire these and then loop a couple of inches of this high temperature wire through the hole in the back. It's literally going to be an upholstery button. I placed 4 of these buttons equally around the perimeter of our flue hole at the top, about an inch or so away from the top hole. This will give us plenty of room in between the blanket and the hole. The top pieces of this fiber blanket that are going to be on the top of this kiln that the flue comes out of is actually going to be held in place by the side blanket on the kiln. These buttons are just to stop the sagging from happening around the flue. Well, subsequently, we're going to do the same thing with our inlet port that we cut on the side. If we can get one down here at the bottom, that'd be great too. I'm just going to eyeball where this button goes, and then I'm going to drill a single hole. Hopefully your drill bit is a lot sharper than mine. Now we can evaluate where all of the other buttons are going to go. I suggest keeping them even, so I'm just going to put 3 more around the perimeter of the bottom here. What are we going to do with these handles? I don't know, nothing. These are fine just to leave the way they are. You might want to make sure, though, that the buttons go below them so that you're not punching through thick metal. How many buttons are you going to need? Not too many. Just be geometric about it in your placement. 4 here, move up, quarter turn of the kiln, 4 more here, etc. I'll show you the pattern when it's done so that you can get an idea of how to place yours. Now with our buttonholes in place around the trash can and around the lip, we'll be able to attach our ceramic fiber blanket to the walls of the kiln, and it won't fall out. We need to get our fiber blanket cut to the right size so it absolutely covers every bit of metal inside the kiln. And we'll use our ceramic buttons to hold all of that fiber blanket in place permanently. The ceramic fiber blanket is made for the thermal industries by many companies, and it comes in several weights and densities. What we're using here is 1 inch thick and 8-pound density. It'll survive extended periods of, say, 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is more than enough for raku or even stoneware. We're going to place the top of our kiln, which is the bottom of this trash can, onto a rolled out piece and trace around it. Take a sharp retractable razor knife and cut the disc out. Fiber blanket cuts like really easily, just like insulation, but you might want to wear gloves and wear a convenience dust mask because the fibers can harm your lungs. This will be the ceiling or the top of our kiln where the flue hole goes. We're going to need 2 of these discs, a fiber blanket on the top, so that the walls of the kiln, or the fiber blanket we put on the walls, will actually match up to the bottom of the kiln. Place the 2 round top pieces, and make sure there are 2, into the can and fit them into place. They should fit a little snug because we traced the outside of the trash can, but the fiber blanket forms very well into shape. Next, we're going to measure the inside and get that cut. The easiest way to do that is to lay out the fiber blanket and then place the can on one end, mark that spot, and then just roll the can until you get to the spot again, and then mark it again. Well, after you cut the blanket, roll it up and place it inside the can. Unroll the blanket out onto the walls of the trash can and tuck it into place. The fiber blanket usually comes in 24-inch rolls, so make sure of that before you buy it. You might end up with an extra overlap like I did here. You'll recall we measured the outside of the can, and so just mark and cut that. But remember, we want to make sure that it fits very tightly with no metal showing on the inside of the can whatsoever. So a little overlap, like maybe an inch, is preferred. And make sure your blanket comes up level to the lip, or even a little past it. And that's going to be needed to make a good seal when we put it onto the base. And in order to give the blanket strength so that we can cut out our ports and our flue holes out, decently, we're going to go ahead and install our upholstery buttons now. Take your looped wire and twist it a couple of times around the back of your ceramic button like this, and make sure the ends are as pointy as possible. On the outside of the kiln, use a long pointed object to use as a pilot and punch through the front of the kiln to the back past the fiber blanket to the inside. Line up your button wire with the pilot, or even attach it with maybe a piece of tape or something, and then use that pilot to pull the button wire back through the hole in the wall of the kiln. Pull the button to the kiln wall, but don't crush the blanket too much, just enough to firmly hold it into place. Spread the wires outward on the outside of the kiln to hold the button in place. Needle nose pliers can be used to help you out here. Once the buttons are all nice and tidy, it's time to cut out our holes. You'll notice I haven't put the top buttons in place yet. We're a little out of order here, so make sure you do that before you cut the top out. You can use a razor knife, but I found that a hacksaw blade works really good when you're trying to cut 2 layers of this fiber blanket at the top, because there's no way to get your hand in there to apply pressure when you cut. You'll notice also that I'm leaving just a little bit inside the metal to make this flue hole just a bit smaller than what we had originally drawn, maybe 1/4 of an inch. And now we can cut the fiber blanket away from the porthole. This is only 1 layer of fiber blanket, so you can do it with a razor knife easily while maybe applying some pressure on the inside or the back side of the fiber blanket. And make sure not to cut yourself though. This step isn't necessary, but if you want the kiln to last a long time and not shed fiber blanket everywhere, you can apply some colloidal silica or rigidizer. You can purchase this online. They also call it water glass. It sometimes has a green tint so that you can actually see where you've sprayed it. A pyrometer is almost a must while doing ceramics. Make sure it has a type K thermocouple, one of the ceramic covered ones like this. And we're going to punch this through the top of the kiln. Here is an older style analog, and here's a cheap digital one that you can get online. Our Type K thermocouple needs to have a hole drilled into the now top of our kiln, but needs to stay relatively close to the inside wall, just next to the fiber blanket, so that way it'll be out of the way of your pottery when you place it on and off. I'm going to start a pilot hole first so as to not make too much of a mess of the metal. Here's why I never released this video originally. I forgot to film the handle installation. I did this by installing 2 large U-bolts, which you can buy at any box store. They have a large metal flange at the back of them. You attach these to the metal flange at the bottom, now the top of your kiln. That's one of the strongest places. Make sure there's enough room to get your gloved hands into these and not touch the body of the kiln, at least not too much. The further away from the kiln, the better. This kiln's entirely useless unless there's a way to lift it off your pots while it's hot. This should be pretty much complete now. The Top Hat Raku kiln is almost done. Let's go outside and test it. Well, here I purchased a 10-inch round kiln shelf from my distributor. You'll need to make sure that it's at least about 1.5 inches between the shelf and the fiber blanket when you put your shell on top of it. So that way you won't choke out the kiln when it's running. You can buy standard kiln posts to support your shelf, maybe about 8-inch kiln post, but I'm just using heavy fire bricks here because I had them on hand. I'm looking through the top of the flue to align the walls with the edge of the kiln shelf. The pillowing action of the edge of this trash can should be plenty to seal the kiln to the bottom of the fiber blanket nicely. Here you can see the area between the wall and the kiln shelf itself. It could be a little wider than this, but this will do. Time to place your thermocouple. It'll want to drop all the way to its base, which might actually short circuit it while it's working. So here you can see how this one wants to do just that. We'll have to put some sort of spacer in between it and the top of the kiln to stop the metal from touching. And here's a temporary fix. I'm just going to stuff some fiber blanket in between it. I've got the cable attached to the thermocouple, and you need to make sure that it's at least long enough to go all the way to the bottom of your kiln to attach to the pyrometer. I'm using the digital pyrometer because of its accuracy. They're not very hard to work if you've never seen one or you're unfamiliar with them. Well, here you can see just how close the probe is to the inside wall of the kiln. And now we're going to test fire the kiln. In this video I'm using what's known as an MR100 Venturi burner, but you can use something smaller like an MR750 or even a good weed burner that you can get from a department store. Depending on the height of your burner port, after you've placed your bricks and blanket for the bottom, you'll need to position your burner so it's perpendicular to the hole. Make sure that you have a way of moving the burner in and out away from the kiln while it's operating so that you can control the flow of air that's going into the kiln. You might end up doing this a lot. I've got a nice ball valve attached to the back of this burner to control the gas from the tank and the regulator. It's far enough away from the burner not to be too hot so that I can adjust it during firing. Also, an MR style burner has this louver at the back that can be adjusted. You can just use a single propane tank for firing, but if you're drawing fuel too fast out of it, you might actually get a freezing problem. So I always manifold 2 tanks together. This is a 60-pound adjustable propane regulator. I usually set it to about 2 or 3 pounds, and then use the ball valve on the burner to adjust the flow. You can purchase one of these at a lot of barbecue places. When you have everything tightened up, make sure your ball valve at the burner is closed completely, and then open up the valves on your tanks. Make sure you don't hear any hissing gas escape. I'm just going to be using shredded newspaper as a reduction media. It's plentiful. I've got these buckets with metal lids ready to seal up after I place a red hot piece in them. I'm placing some glazed pieces onto my shelf, making sure to not have them overhanging the kiln shelf. That way they won't touch the fiber blanket walls. Now while you're looking through the top hole of the kiln, place it over your shelf and pieces, adjusting it as necessary if you need to. Try standing on something if you're short so that you can get over the hole and actually view the kiln shelf. After you're sure that nothing is touching your glaze, you can start the burner. We're going to start out with a slow candling flame just to get the temperature to 600 degrees slowly. That way we won't harm our pottery pieces. Light an extended lighter or a long match and place it in front of the burner, and then slowly release the ball valve in the back until you hear a slight hiss. The burner should light, but if it doesn't, go ahead and shut it down. Turn the ball valve off and let all the gas dissipate out of your kiln before you try again. Try and place one of your bricks or kiln posts that support the shelf directly in front of the flame near the back of the kiln. That way the flame will have something to strike besides the fiber blanket. After the flame has run for a while, check your pyrometer, and when it reaches 600 degrees, you can release more gas into the kiln from your ball valve. Look for that blue color to start and hear a slight jet engine noise sound. You want to time your firing to about 30 minutes to get a good even glaze melt. Watch your pyrometer to see if it rises too fast or too slowly. You want to get to about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit in about 30 minutes, so adjust accordingly. Look into the kiln to see if your glazes look melted. If they do, and you're anywhere close to 1800 degrees, it's time to pull your pottery. Make sure to have your leather welding gloves on and your pottery tongs ready where you can get to them. You'll also need another piece of fiber blanket nearby so that you can set your hot kiln top on it without burning the ground. Turn the gas all the way off on the ball valve until the flame goes out. Make sure you have a clear footpath and then slowly lift the kiln off of the pieces and place it on the other piece of fiber blanket. Now, being very careful, quickly grab one of the red hot raku pieces off the shelf and place it in one of the buckets of shredded newspaper. Let it burn for a second or two and then place the lid on it, and I always use a brick to make sure that expanding gas won't pop that lid back off again. Leave the pieces in anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes and then remove them. You can actually take them and quench them in a bucket of water at this point to make sure that the colors freeze.